The way this will work is we'll run through a few bits of general information because everyone wants to know averages, high, low, all that sort of stuff. And then we'll talk through each of the questions, looking at what was the question really asking for, as well as what were the strengths and weaknesses in the response. What we're looking for you to do right throughout this hour is work out where do you fit into this picture. So if you scored 19 out of 20, good on you. Where do you get the extra mark? For those guys who scored 6 out of 20, we've got issues. Where do you find the extra marks? But most importantly, I also want to celebrate those guys who achieve beyond their targets. Because if you're a band 3 kind of guy, and you got a band 4 or 5 in this, which some guys did, then you should be celebrated as much as the ducks of the colleges. Similarly, those guys who are targeting band 5 and got a band 3 or 4 will end up a serious chat. So it's not necessarily best mark or worst mark, it's how did you perform against where you should be performing. One of the realities of assessment is that you get a bit of a vibe. When you walk out of the exam room, you have a bit of a sense, how did you go? And most of the time, certainly when I've done exams, I've been completely wrong. When you walk out, you think, I did really well there. You usually get a pretty poor mark, in my case, and vice versa. What I want to look at today is really the facts. So we're going to look at raw data, and I'm going to try and interpret some of it for you, give you a few graphs, and it's the sort of stuff you need to get your head into for the next couple of years. Here's the core stuff. So I've broken it up by raw marks and then percentages to make life easier, as well as 1 and 2 unit. Can I point out just a couple of things? The high mark in both was 30 out of 30. Now the mark that you've got on your piece of paper is out of 20. Add to that the progress mark that you received for the 3 weeks prior. There is a significant difference here between, particularly in 1 unit, the mean and the median. So the mean's the average, the median's the middle mark. Now the reason for that gap is there's a couple of guys who had non-serious attempts in the 1 unit course. Those guys will not be in the course going forward from today. Because of that non-serious attempt, they come out of the equation. So I'd suggest to you, if you're trying to work out where do you sit in relation to average, maybe look at the median mark more so than the average, right? Because that's going to give you a better idea of where you're sitting. This was really interesting. 2 unit guys, no one achieved beyond their target, but a good number achieved at their target, but also a significant number below. And in some cases, 2 bands below. All right, so we're talking bands here. So where did you fit? 6, 5, 4, 3. 1 unit guys was pretty exciting. Quite a few guys said, I'm going to target a band 5 and they achieved a band 6. I'm going to target a band 4 and they achieved a band 5. And in some cases, they were targeting 3 and achieved 5. So there was a 2 band difference between what they said they were going to try and aim for as an aspirational target and reality. The concern, as I said, are those guys who are achieving below targets. And so we're talking about almost half the cohort in 1 unit. The following guys deserve particular mention. Every one of these guys went beyond their targets. Now I haven't included in here the guys who said they would get band 6 and got band 6. Right? That's obviously just as good because you can't achieve any better than band 6, but these guys said that they would achieve something lower than band 6 and achieved higher than it. Right, so those guys in particular deserve congratulations. I guess the real question around all this stuff is why are we looking at it? And ultimately we're trying to compare ourselves to the rest of the state. In 6 terms time, you guys will be compared using the Board of Studies HSC to work out how we're travelling as a cohort. So your rank internally is important, but how we go as a cohort against the rest of the state's important. Let me share with you that 75% is the Board of Studies average for every one of your courses in a round sort of figure. So no longer is 50% your benchmark. 75% should be the median average mark. We're not far from it, to be honest. And once those couple of guys come out of the stats, we're pretty close to the mark now. One of the things you should also know is that up to this stage in every year prior to this one, we've had 1 Catholic Studies class. And all those guys who would have been in Catholic Studies have been studying 1 unit. Now, this year we've got a much more accurate spread of people, and we've started with 2 Catholic Studies classes, which means there's less in the cohort, but it means that people that are here really should be working pretty hard. So I'm pretty happy with the average mark. Once we take those couple of stats out for the non-serious attempts, we're pretty well on target. You should also know that the school's obviously much bigger than you guys as a single cohort. Year 12 are always our priority, Year 11 not far behind. Here's where we've been for the last few years, and I don't know how many of these sort of graphs you've seen so far, but the way that they work, the line across the middle of the table is where statistically we should achieve. Now it's not state average, it's where should this cohort in 2012, 2011, 2010, what mark should they achieve? And in situations where the dot's below the line, it means that cohort as an average achieved less than what they really should have. Take a look at the angles that are going on there. The top graph is 2 unit, the bottom graph's 1 unit. In both cases, the trajectory is really positive. Both going in the right direction, and for the first time ever last year, both 1 and 2 unit were above state average. Now that hasn't just happened, there's been a hell of a lot of hard work that's been going on, and it's been a three-way conversation between you guys, your parents and your teachers. And you need to know that across the next 2 years, those three groups need to work in unison, and if we're not, then there's issues. Here's the next bit that's interesting, and I want you to take a little bit of time understanding this graph. Each colour represents a band range, and so 100% of the cohort studies in each year. If we take a look at the 2013 data, you see that almost half the cohort in 1 unit achieved a band 5. No one got a band 6 last year, but nor did anyone get band 1 or 2. So last year's result, I would argue, are the best ones we've had in a really long time, because we're starting to see that really significant band 5. My aim for this year's cohort, the current Year 12, sitting over there studying and doing their exams at the moment, is we start hitting the band 6s pretty regularly. And by the time that you guys get through Year 12, my target would be at least a quarter of the cohort on band 6, at least a half the cohort band 5 or above, and no one on bands 1, 2 or 3. No one bands 1, 2 or 3. Everybody else in that top range. That's a real target. And I've said for the last few years, I want the SOR results to be the best ones in the school. Last year they were pretty close. Last year we were beaten by, I think, industrial technology and one other course. So they're getting up there. And considering it's a larger cohort, it's important. So I guess the real question here is what's my point of dribbling? It's about doing hard work. It's about saying for the next 2 terms, as we finish off the Year 11 course, what are we going to do to get there? And I'll share with you now, that's the next thing you're doing to get there. In terms of hard work, that's your holiday homework. You're getting it now. It's due day 1 next term. And by the time day 1 next term rolls around, you'll have read every one of these pages and made annotations. And that's been happening for the last couple of years. And you can see over the last couple of years, if I bounce back, that it's making a difference. If the graphs are showing that, and the things that have changed are pre-reading packages and a focus on writing, you've got to argue those 2 things are making a difference. So expect that every holiday break between now and the HSC, you'll have a package similar to that, if not larger. All right, let's get into the questions then. Happy for you to pick up your paper so that you can read along. I've intentionally not given you the marking criteria on your piece of paper, nor have I given you a separate handout. What I'm hoping you'll do is work out right now where you miss out on marks and then take note of that. So you need your pen with you so you can write down what are the things that are missing from your response that needed to be there to score full marks. You should also know that for every single question, there were people who scored full marks, and for every question, there's people who scored 0. My intention in terms of marking, and I know that the same for miss and miss, is that we end up with a spread. There's no point in us ending up with everyone getting 90% plus. First of all, it's not realistic, and secondly, it doesn't help you guys when we get to the HSC. My aim in terms of assessment task for writing is to produce tasks that spread you out right along the spectrum. We'll talk more about why next year. So, using the images, and that's a key phrase, using the images. As well as your own knowledge, answer the following question. Compare, and compare is a key word and it's been highlighted for you, immanent and transcendent religious worldviews. Explain both terms and provide examples. So the criteria is exactly the question reworded. Have you correctly identified immanent and transcendent? You get 2 marks if you've done that. Have you made clear the differences between them? So that's the comparison. You get an extra mark if you've done that clearly. It's not good enough to simply say, this is what immanent is, this is what transcendent is. You need to make the comparison. You need to join them in some way. The place where people lost the most amount of marks was utilising the stimulus. And if you look at the question, the very first words say, using the images. If you didn't use the images, you didn't get the mark. So using the stimulus, and that's the case in the HSC. For these style 5-mark questions, 5 through to 8 marks in the section 2 area, you get stimulus. You need to reference it, you need to use it in order to access the top marks. And finally, providing appropriate examples. Now, just in terms of those examples, those guys who are unfortunate enough to be in my IPT class, you've heard this last week. I want you to be really straightforward with the marker. Don't be tricky. Give them exactly what they're looking for in the easiest way possible. For example, in IPT, we talk about input devices and output devices, things that go into the computer and things that come out of the computer. So a screen is an output device. An input device is a keyboard. In that course, if you write an input device is a PlayStation controller, you'd be quite right. You're putting information into the computer. If you said a PlayStation controller is an output device, you're still right because of the vibration. Because by using it, and when you get shot and the remote vibrates, it's giving you an output. But it's not the most obvious answer. It's not the easiest one to use. I'd suggest here for every one of your HSC courses, use the easy example rather than the tricky example. You don't get extra marks for being smart about it. You get marks for demonstrating clearly. So, as an example, Buddhism was a tricky one. You can argue Buddhism, and a lot of people did, and they got marks for it, but it's a whole lot harder than arguing the 2 examples that were in the question. If you use the Aboriginal spirituality example as immanent, that's a whole lot easier than trying to argue Buddhism as immanent. Similarly, for the first stimulus, you can pick out any one of the Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and you'll get the marks more easily. So don't be tricky. Go for the obvious, go for the easy, and make sure you score the marks. You're only going to score a maximum of 5. You don't get bonus ones for going with tricky examples. Generally speaking, it was pretty well done. Average on this question was about 3.6 out of 5. What I've provided in the package, by the way, is a scanned version of an exemplar response. Not perfect, but one example of a decent response. So this particular response scored 5 out of 5. I'll let you go away later and have a look at it online to see what it was in that question, or what it was in this response rather, that scored band 5. Question 2 then. So using the images as a guide to interpreting the question, as well as your own knowledge, explain, and explain's a key word, it's been highlighted. Explain how the characteristics of religion interact to create a dynamic living religion. There was, of course, a red herring in this question. Sacred space is not one of the characteristics. It's been put in there as a red herring. For those guys who don't know their content, it's going to trip you up. And for those guys who listed sacred space as one of the characteristics, yeah, it showed. So the stimulus is there not to give you the answer, but it's to prompt you. And one of the things about this one was the arrows. It was showing that you had to demonstrate the interaction between them. Defining the characteristics was nice, but that's not what the question asked you to do. It asked for the cause and the effect, which is what explain means, and the interaction. So defining beliefs and believers is nice, but you didn't score a mark for it. Defining sacred text and working around sacred text is nice, but unless you showed how sacred text interacts with the beliefs and believers, then it wasn't worth a great deal of marks. So in terms of marking scheme then, if you manage to use cause and effect language, and we'll talk more about that later next term, you got a mark. If you listed the 4 characteristics correctly, you also scored a couple of marks. but it was the relationship between them where people lost the most amount of marks. So those people who scored 3 typically didn't demonstrate a relationship. They typically listed them, defined them, explained those characteristics very well, but didn't show the relationship between them. Again, I've provided a sample response there. I'll give you a chance to look at that online later.
Okay, question 3 done reasonably well as well. I think ranging between 3 and 5, roughly 2 and 3 was perhaps the lowest. Wasn't done as well as question 4, we'll get to that. And definitely some top marks for this one, some outstanding responses, some 5 out of 5. Firstly, explain the contribution of religion both to individuals and to societies and their cultures. My goodness, it's a gift of a question because there's so much content you can pack into this response to get you 5. In fact, I know speaking from my class, you could probably make this worth 10. This is a big question. It's a gift of a question to only be worth 5. Explain implies you need to utilise your cause and effect language. And as I said, if I was approaching this from a student's perspective, I would break it down in looking at the content for individuals and looking at societies and culture. And if you do that, and you know your stuff, you have to get 5 if you're drawing the links across. Of course, also referencing the stimulus. Some weird and wonderful captioning of that stimulus, which I believe is the Taj Mahal, right, sir? Some very interesting labels of that particular stimulus. But, I could forgive you if you kind of made it relevant, but of course it is the Taj Mahal. Let's look at the content. Have a look at your response right now, and as I read through my suggested answers, have a little look to see if you've got this in front of you. Because it did expose, those people who got 2 and 3, it did expose a lack of content knowledge. And there's a whole section in the text, and I'm quite sure that your teachers, as I did with my class, brainstormed this and had a really good discussion around this sociological view of religion. How does it contribute to society? Contribution, the word itself, if you're tackling that appropriately, you are answering a cause and effect response. How does it contribute? It leads to, as a result of, subsequently, consequently. There's no real way you can answer that question sensibly without doing that. And you'll find in a minute that that was one of the ways you got yourself a mark. So do you have this for individuals? Do you have that it offers hope and faith for the individual? That it's a basis to shape morals and ethics? That it provides a sense of self, belonging, identity? That it gives adherents an opportunity to answer the big questions, their place in the world, why are we here, what's next, why do we experience pain and suffering? And for societies and cultures, you can almost draw a link across from that individual column and say, well, how, for example, does offering hope and faith to adherents impact the society and the culture? Well, it provides a cohesive society. If people are all on board with similar values, and yes, you can obtain these through secular means as well, but from a religious perspective, it provides cohesion. Okay, same, generally, same beliefs, same values, everybody on board. Just like you can draw a link with sense of belonging and identity across to society and culture by suggesting that it creates cause and effect language, an ordered, structured society with similar underpinning values. You use these concepts and you're going to impress your examiner. Key terms. Okay? What about, again, a sense of identity and belonging collectively leading to unity in the community? And then you can introduce your 2 religious traditions, which is exactly what the question asked you to do, which some of you conveniently forgot. That's how you'll fast lose yourself quick marks. By talking about engaging people with a common purpose. Attendance at Mass, for example, if you're Christian. Worship at a temple. All right, this leads to, cause and effect language, leads to unity and community, common sense of purpose, cohesion. If you've put all of that somehow sensibly into your response with cause and effect language, you have to get 5. How was it done well? There were some great arguments for individual and societal benefits. Societal, S-O-C-I-E-T-A-L, pertaining to society. So great arguments for individual and societal benefits, and some really good use of cause and effect language. So you've been taught well in Year 10, obviously. Good use of cause and effect language. Weaknesses. Some of you chose to look at contribution in a negative light, don't set yourself up to fail. That's tricky. If you want to go there and be the rebel and present the opposite side, you've really got to know your stuff. And we are students of religion, we are studying religion, we're not trying to push anything on you in SOR, you know that. However, if you want to start arguing for the rebel cause, it's harder for you to set that case up. So if you're going to start talking about negative contributions, tricky. Sir?
Certainly, sort of like what I was saying before, Miss, about going to the easy, obvious rather than going to the tricky.
Why wouldn't you? I mean, I've just given you content, 2 tables that I've written, and that's minimum 5 out of 5, right? That, as I said, the question could be worth 10 marks. It's that rich with content. So I don't know, some of you did it. No, it certainly was only a minority. Don't set yourself up for difficulties. The other weakness was subjective language, use of emotive language. Don't go there. We are students of religion. This is not a reflective response. We're not asking you to evaluate what religion does for you. So no us, no me, no my faith. This is explain the contribution of religion to societies and individuals. So take yourself out of the equation. You talk objectively about Christianity. You talk objectively about the Islamic faith, objectively about Hinduism, if they're your examples. And just on that was the weakness. It specifically asks you to refer to at least 2 religious traditions. And when we say religious traditions, we're not talking about traditions in the custom and ritual sense of the word. Let's get that straight. Some of you fell off the plank there a bit. Religious traditions, we're talking about the major religious faiths. All right, so you had to incorporate a reference to Christianity or Islam or Judaism to get yourself that mark. Overall, reasonably well, but definitely room to improve. Some of you are sort of hitting that 3 out of 5 area there. Any questions? There's the marking criteria. This is what I use, and I marked 3 and 4, so I'm the pretty pink, and I can't help myself. I have written a few things on your text, which may give you some idea as to where you dropped 1 or 2 marks. And alternatively, if you got 5 out of 5, I circled or triple ticked or double ticked areas that I think are great strengths. Okay, so you had to answer the explain question through cause and effect language. I've already said, you know that backwards, surely. Cause and effect language, this leads to, subsequently, consequently, as a result. Even if you say it contributed to, it contributes to, and you paraphrase the question, you're already doing it. So for style, you'd have to pick yourself up a mark. It's almost, it will be evident in your response. As I said, it started at the beginning with the content, 2 marks. That's a gift. Identifying at least 1 contribution that religion makes to individuals and societies. And I've spoken for 5 minutes about it. So it's almost essay work. Okay? And correctly draws, now this is where some of us fell down, correctly draw on 2 different religious traditions as examples. And there's a stimulus there for you to utilise. Alright, any questions about question 3? Sir has kindly scanned, and this is obviously one of mine with a few additional comments. You may recognise it, but it's there for you, will be uploaded for you to have a look at. And this is a brilliant way for you to learn and improve next time round. When you see how well somebody else has structured a point that maybe you struggle to get across, this is a beautiful way to learn, looking at exemplar responses. Can I mention, and Sir, Mr Matheson wrote it on a few of the question 1 and 2, you really should be using the lines as a guide. Some of you are very verbose and you like to write at length, and that's going to be wonderful come the final exam. Try to limit your content to the guidelines given to you. I don't mind going over by 3 or 4 lines, but when you're actually utilising new paper, it can become messy and a bit problematic, and you do yourself a disservice if you run out of time. Okay? Alright, question 4. I won't speak as long for question 4 as I did for question 3 because this was actually done very, very well. I don't know if it's because it's most recent content covered or because it's content that you found easy to grasp, or, my theory, because a lot of the stuff you needed to link was in the question itself. So if you are sensibly able to link the key concepts behind me, those 4 dot points, and you're able to link them back to a beautiful definition of the dreaming, there is no way you could fall short of 5 out of 5. This is a gift of a question as well. Alright, if you know your stuff, and it's the most recent content we did, you should know your stuff. If you can define the dreaming and link it back to key terms, the use of key terms was excellent. I have to praise you where credit is due. Key terms, if you've got things like sacred sites, stories, symbolism, tradition, customs, rituals, ancestral beings, capital A, capital B, totems, imminence, animism, etc. That is outstanding use of key terms, and some of you utilised all of them in a paragraph. It is hard to award less than 5 out of 5 if you're doing that. As I said, the question's done very, very well. Good use of examples as well. Identifying stories, myths like Rainbow Serpent, the origin of the Blue Mountains, if you were talking about origins of the universe, to clarify and to highlight your own understanding. But I found that I was awarding 5 out of 5. And we're not looking for ways or reasons to take marks off. So as I said, credit where credit's due. Question 4 was quite a pleasure to mark because people seem to know their stuff and utilise examples and key terms, the show-off terms, the buzzwords I just listed or rattled off. You put those in there and you sensibly link, and this is a describe. Yeah, this is even easier than question 3. Describe, call it how you see it. You weren't even asked to evaluate, you weren't even asked to make links, just a description. So you should have got 5 out of 5. So well done to you who did. The poorer responses, just to finish, simply restated those dot points. And I'm no fool, I can see where that's being done. So you might write this much, but all you've done essentially is paraphrase those 4 dot points. You're not going to get the 5. If you link them back to the question and you explain each one of them and make them fit the question, describe the nature of the dreaming, then yes, you'll get your marks. But simply restating or summarising the question without any of your own links, you probably found yourself getting 3 or 4. All right. Marking criteria, as we've just said, identify the dreaming with your historical, in a historical sense, ongoing, timeless, cyclical, 2 marks. Address the spiritual dimension of the dreaming, it's only worth 1 mark. If you know your stuff, you'll get it. And as I said, finally, making appropriate reference to one of the elements listed in the question. So restating them and relisting them doesn't get you those final 2 marks. Again, there's an inclusion of an exemplar response of 5 out of 5. Can I reiterate? This doesn't mean it's the only way to answer this question. Where you see 5, you think, wow, that's fantastic, but it doesn't mean that their 5 is better than your 5, or is the only way to answer the question. It's a guide, how to get band 6, how to get full marks.
There was a couple of points that Miss just brought up that I wanted to flesh out a little bit, and you need to have it in the context of the HSC. Everything we're doing here is focused in 6 terms' time. You should know that the HSC is more and more being marked online. What that means is that your exam booklet gets broken up, scanned, and then basically is available for online access for the markers. So the markers, instead of all gathering in one place, can do it from home or can do it from work, and they'll log on to this website and look at your scanned document. The reason I bring it up isn't for the marker's sake, but it's because if you guys start writing in the way you did in that paper, all around the margins and adding in extra bits, it won't be scanned. So you'll find that there's boundaries put on the paper. Those boundaries need to be adhered to because anything outside those boundaries won't be seen by the markers. So Miss mentioned that you've got a certain number of lines as a guide as to how much you write. Use it. Part of the challenge at this task was to be succinct. To say what you need to say in a short but dense few lines. Right? You need a lot of content in not a lot of lines. And the reason I'm targeting that as one technique is because a lot of questions in the HSC for particularly 1 unit, but also in the case of 2 unit, is short responses. So you get 5 marks at the end of section 1. This is out of 50, remember, so 10% of your HSC. comes at the end of section 1 as a 5-mark response. The next section is section 2, and that's broken up into about 3 marks, 4 marks, and then like an 8-mark question. So it's 2 relatively short responses, and then often a kind of longer response, maybe a page, page and a half. Not an extended response, but a long response. So you need the skill at being able to score 3 and 4 marks pretty regularly. If you're starting to get 3 out of 5 in that question 11 particularly, instantly you're dropping yourself out of the race for band 6 overall. You can't afford, when the exam's out of 50, to drop 2 or 3 marks here and there. So we need to get pretty efficient at scoring the marks in the minimal space required. So I wanted to again draw you back to the, looking to the long term. Looking in 6 terms time, where's the area that we can lift? Now this was a graph I generated last year, and it's based on the state average versus the Holy Cross average. So the state is the blue line, Holy Cross is the red line. The way that this works is the graph sitting behind is the short answer stuff. And you can see that the blue line is consistently above the red line, but not by much. It's within a half-mark range all the time. But when you look at the extended response, the section 3, you can see there's a 2-mark gap straight away. If there's a 2 or 3-mark gap in extended response writing, remember that 2 or 3 marks is worth 4 or 6%. We're going to have real challenges getting over the line in total. So we need to focus on our writing. We need to get the writing component perfectly correct, because it's the expression on the piece of paper that makes the difference. And I think across the board, the understanding that was shown in the exam was pretty good, but it was the expressing it on paper and interpreting the question and the requirements of that question that were the real challenges. So the question of where to next, there's 2 options. And I'm being very honest and genuine. I'm not kicking anyone out of the course. You need to hear that clearly. But I'm tapping a few people on the shoulder to say, have a serious think about changing course to Catholic Studies. Not as a payout, not as a put down, but as a simple statement of fact. Right now, based on the workload that you've demonstrated, you're not up to scratch. Based on what you've done so far, on the performance that you've produced, you're not going to score well in the HSC, because we're not competing against 40 blokes, we're competing against 40,000. We're competing across the entire state, and if you can't perform within this small cohort, the result you're going to score in 6 terms' time isn't worth the piece of paper it's printed on. You're much better off doing Catholic Studies, where the assessment tasks are less time consuming and they're put on at times that are less intense for you blokes. So right now when Year 12 are doing their half-yearly exams, there is no Catholic Studies exam. They did it in class a couple of weeks ago to take the pressure off. So the course is designed that you do the work, but we do it in a way that's having least impact on your other subjects, and we're giving you an opportunity to perform better across the board. So if you get the tap on the shoulder, if you get handed the blue change of subject form, be aware that there's a real reason for it. Based on the experience of all 3 of us, we've looked at your results and we don't think you're capable of getting a result right now which is worth achieving. It's not going to contribute towards ATAR, for instance. If ATAR takes your best 10 units, you can guarantee that this unit won't fit in that 10, based on the marks for those blokes. For those guys who are choosing to stay on in the course, and this first assessment task is a watershed moment. It's one of those places where people split. For those guys who are staying, here's the requirements. First of all, by tomorrow, I want every single person to have logged into Hive and completed the feedback. There's a little orange megaphone type icon, and it says post-unit evaluation. That evaluation is not of you blokes. It's an evaluation of the 3 of us. We want you to give us the feedback as to what we're doing well and how we can help you better. I said at the beginning, it's a 3-way conversation between you guys, your teachers and your parents. You need to tell us how we can support you better. So if there's a learning technique or a learning style or an in-class methodology that works really well for you, you need to tell us. If there's something we're doing that's frustrating you, that's boring you, that's not achieving anything for you, tell us. Because if you don't, we won't know any better. So we want the feedback to tell us how we can do better. That's what that evaluation is about. Your name doesn't get recorded against comments, right? So it's anonymous, but I'm asking for your honesty. And I'm asking for every single person in both 1 and 2 units to complete it. So that's sitting in Hive, it's sitting in the unit we've just completed. The second thing, and I've opened it up this morning, is the new unit. Because this is an 11-week term, next term is a 9-week term, we're going to start the new unit next week, if not this week. So Christianity is the new unit. We'll commence that basically from next period, if not next week, and it'll then carry on for the 10 weeks. Here's your homework. Everyone does that on your online evaluation by tomorrow morning. Those guys who are continuing, I want this document, which you'll collect on the way out, completely annotated. By annotated, I mean you've taken to it with a pen and a highlighter and you've worked out what are the critical things in it. What are the things that are sitting in this document and how can you reinterpret them? So with a pen, I'd expect you to circle a concept and rephrase it in your own words, in the margin. So there's plenty of blank pages in there, there's plenty of margin space for you to do that. My hope would be that by the time you walk in day 1 next term, you know all the content for this unit. It seems silly saying in the first week of a term, you should know everything. But that's where I want you. So that the next 9 weeks after that, we can tailor that understanding. Rather than learning new content, what we're doing is refining your understanding and giving us time and space to work on the writing skills, which makes a difference. So you having this document with you in class, completely annotated, like bookmarked, flags in it, however it works for you, do it. The first page inside it, by the way, is the syllabus for this unit. So that'll give you a good study guide. As you work your way through it, you'll be able to tick off the different elements. So that's due at the first day next term.